Hey everyone, it's Julien of the Lafayette Trail. Today I'm standing on the very active Clinton Square in Syracuse. The Salt City, the Erie Canal used to run right under my feet on what's now Erie Boulevard. Syracuse was incorporated in 1825, the very same year when the Erie Canal was completed. 1825 also happens to be the year when Lafayette traveled across upstate New York from Buffalo to Albany. The Frenchmen visited Syracuse on June 9th, 1825, and we are here today to commemorate and mark his visit. Syracuse, like many communities across upstate New York, was deeply transformed by the arrival of the Erie Canal. The canal allowed communities like Syracuse to pursue specialization, like the salt here, to advance their urban nature. Syracuse became the center of gravity between Buffalo and Albany, a central location where all the newly unleashed forces from every corner of the state met. From local isolation to national prosperity, the story of Syracuse echoes that of the country itself. So how exactly does Lafayette's 1825 visit fit within that picture of a patriotic growth? And more importantly, why was the canal so important to Lafayette? These are our questions today. We've got some answers to figure out. So let us waste no time, let us hit the trail, let's follow the Frenchman. Lafayette visited New York State in 1824, but he mostly went to New York City and some communities up and down the Hudson River. You'd have to wait another year for him to return to New York State. It was in June of 1825 when Lafayette came back from his trips to the south and the west. He entered New York State again in Chautauqua County, and from there proceeded across upstate New York all the way to Albany. And in that section, Lafayette got on and off the Erie Canal several times, 4 to be precise. So let's just count together. The first time was in Black Rock. He got on the canal there to go to Tonawanda. The second time was in Lockport, and then he went to Rochester. He got on the canal again a third time in Syracuse right here to go to Rome, and a fourth and final time in Utica to go to Schenectady. So overall, Lafayette traveled close to 200 of the soon-to-be completed 363-mile-long Erie Canal. Lafayette's visit to Syracuse really confirmed the growing nature of the city as a transportation hub. Williston's Mansion House, where Lafayette was received, was located on the northern edge of Clinton Square. In the newspapers that were circulated in New York State and even beyond in 1824-25, this was an establishment that enjoyed great publicity. Lafayette's decision to travel on the Erie Canal was not improvised. As a matter of fact, it was calculated, and it was calculated a long time in advance. In my research, I have found a document from the governor of New York in 1825, DeWitt Clinton, sharing with the New York State legislature an invitation that he had sent to Lafayette, and he shared with the state legislature Lafayette's response. And in his response, Lafayette makes clear that he wants to return to New York State, and he wants to travel on the Erie Canal. The question is, why did Lafayette have to be so specific? Why did he have to mention the Erie Canal specifically in his response to the governor? The canal had been heavily criticized for the weak constitutional grounds on which it relied, but Lafayette was convinced that the Erie Canal was in the national interest, and he decided to throw in all of his political weight as the nation's guest to support the canal. And one of the ways this was done was by combining the aura and persona of Lafayette, the nation's guest, with that of DeWitt Clinton, the primary architect of the Erie Canal. And I'll give you 2 examples to show how it was done. First is with boat naming. When Lafayette got on the canal in Utica to go to Schenectady, he traveled on the packet boat Governor Clinton, a direct reference to DeWitt Clinton. And the second example is through the glass-making industry. There was a flask that was produced in Connecticut that reflected the connection between the two men. In 1825, there was a new president in the White House, John Quincy Adams of Massachusetts. And with Adams's election comes a drastic change in the national political landscape with regard to the attitude of the federal government to funding public works projects known as the internal improvements. And it's a break because for a long time, the Virginian presidents, especially Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe, successively cast doubts on the federal government's ability to get involved with funding projects such as the Erie Canal. In the early 1800s, under Thomas Jefferson's administration, the Cumberland Road was started as arguably one of the very first internal improvement projects of the early republic, with the goal of creating greater coherence between the West and the East as the nation was growing westward. Thomas Jefferson and his Treasury Secretary Albert Gallatin were able to find legal shelters in the commerce and postal clauses of the US Constitution to move forward with the project. But there were already voices in the debates surrounding the passing of that bill that expressed concerns about the federal government and specifically Congress's ability to act on the subject of internal improvements. In 1817, there was a major moment in the United States with regard to the conversation on internal improvements. The bonus bill, which would have helped to allocate federal funding to help pay for projects such as the Erie Canal, was vetoed by outgoing President James Madison. And here in New York, the state legislature was counting on federal help to help pay for the Erie Canal, and this money never came. So New York State was faced with a daunting decision to make. And in April of 1817, the state legislature of New York finally passed the Erie Canal bill that officially paved the way for the project to get started. The primary architect of the Erie Canal was a man by the name of DeWitt Clinton. Clinton was a former mayor of New York City. He was a former presidential candidate in the election of 1812, eventually losing to James Madison. And he was the current governor in 1825 when Lafayette was back in New York. Clinton was an ardent supporter of the Erie Canal. He believed the canal was in New York City's interest, that it was also in downstate and upstate's interest, in New York State in general, and in the interest of the state, and also in the national interest. Newspapers that were supporting Clinton in the state did not hesitate to compare him with Thomas Jefferson in his Declaration of Independence, while the opposition newspapers were denouncing Clinton as an office seeker and a fool, referring to his Erie Canal as Clinton's folly or the big ditch. Remember, these are the 1810s. The Federalist Party is basically gone. There's only one major competitive party, the Democratic Republican Party. And within that party, there are two factions, one supporting Clinton and the other one, also known as the Bucktails, opposing Clinton. This was led by Martin Van Buren, future president of the United States. So there was a lot of animosity, but eventually Martin Van Buren concurred with Clinton that the canal would be in the collective interest of New Yorkers. He joined in, and on the 4th of July, 1817, the digging of the Erie Canal officially started in a date that sounded like a new kind of Declaration of Independence. What kind of independence? Manufacturing independence. Clinton believed that the canal would help facilitate the development of Western New York, that it would help to create the American manufacturing capacity that was so needed after the War of 1812, that it would help to increase the population of the state and help transform New York City into the American port of the East Coast. If you take a look at the population change between 1790 and 1830, you will notice that New York State goes from being on a position of equal ground with the other Atlantic states to one of dominance in the entire nation in 1830. And yes, you can bet that the Erie Canal had a lot to do with that. There's a variety of parameters to explain why this new manufacturing independence was declared here in New York State. In my opinion, there are two factors that are of paramount importance. Number one, the geography of the state. New York had access to, on one end, the Atlantic Ocean, and on the other end, the waters of the Great Lakes region, Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. But in addition to that geography, New York State also had the topography to make a connection between the two ends possible. However, possible did not mean automatic. Clinton had to fight a lot for the canal to become a reality. Clinton was immediately attacked as being looking for votes when he first suggested that the canal should go all the way to Buffalo. But a few years later, when Lafayette traveled on the canal in that part of New York, The Frenchman was able to shut down a political attack and was able to transform a personal attack against Clinton into a moment of national unity, thereby fulfilling his historic function as a stabilizing presence, while at the same time carrying on the legacy of national unity championed by George Washington himself before him. A few months later, in October of 1825, when it is finally time to dedicate the Erie Canal, DeWitt Clinton will travel on the canal, and he will do so using the very same boat, the Seneca Chief, that Lafayette used to go from Black Rock to Tonawanda a few months prior, all but continuing the symbolic endorsement of the Erie Canal by the Frenchmen.
The New York Daughters of the American Revolution are honored to sponsor a Lafayette marker for the city of Syracuse at Clinton Square as we share another chapter of the history of General Lafayette and his 1824-1825 farewell tour.
History is so important, and we all know how fleeting memory is. You know, it takes a generation for these stories to slip through our fingers and to fall through the cracks, lost from our textbooks and lost from our public consciousness. It is efforts like this, works like Julien's, that help us as a people to better understand our history and how we were created to be the American nation that we are today.
We feel strongly that historic markers help educate the public, encourage pride of place, and promote historic tourism. One of the ways that the Pomeroy Foundation fulfills its mission is to fund historic markers on the Lafayette Trail, established to commemorate Lafayette's U.S. farewell tour.
You often hear me say that the country survived the divisiveness of the 1824 presidential election, that the institutions have been tested, that they survived, and that as a result, the country expressed renewed confidence in their resilience. Well, I believe that the same can be said about the Erie Canal. The canal went from producing division to generating prosperity. And that to me is when Lafayette comes in. He was able to make the case that the canal was an expression of superior Republican principles and that this prosperity was an American prosperity. And I think that along the way, you can also get interesting insight into how familiar Lafayette really was with the American form of government. He understood perfectly well that New York State came through on behalf of the entire nation. And on his way out, you can bet that he gave credit where credit was due. That's it for us today in Syracuse. I want to thank you for following the Frenchmen to the Salt City. I will see you on the trail very soon. Thank you for watching. À bientôt!